10 of those groups at the same time. And just in New Jersey, in this tiny state alone, we had 36 state police undercover agents doing this. So you can imagine how many people we were bringing in. Didn't take long, and about every 45 days, I'd have maybe 100 people with these charges, and we'd have a raid. And by the way, this wasn't the only way we'd get the charges, because the way the laws are written, it was similar in every state, and it said, it's illegal to distribute a controlled dangerous substance, and then it would give you a long list of the substances. Didn't say anything in there about money exchanging hands. So they didn't even have to sell me drugs. You know, drug use, especially soft drug use like marijuana, hash use, very social thing. Get a half a dozen people standing around in a corner, you spark up one joint, take 2 tokes on it, pass it to the person on the right, and it goes around the circle. So the first time it would come to me, I would pretend to take a toke on this marijuana cigarette, hand it to the next person. Pardon?
But you didn't inhale.
I didn't. I didn't. I never had to. I never used any kind of drug at all when I was out there, and I didn't have to, and I took great pride in the fact that I was sneaky enough not to. I can't say that about a lot of the...
No, not about Ken.
Oh, well, yeah, let's talk about Mr. Clinton, the guy that didn't inhale. You know, had he been standing in that circle with me, it wouldn't have mattered whether he inhaled or not. Because I would let that marijuana cigarette go around the first time, people were getting a little high, and it'd come around the next time, and when it came to me, it's just a little roach down. I would knock the flame off the end of it, and I'd stick it in my pocket. And that night I would submit it as evidence that the person who handed it to me was a drug dealer. Because as I say, you didn't have to exchange money for this. All you had to do was transfer any illicit drug from one hand to the other. And had Mr. Clinton been there, it wouldn't have mattered at all that he didn't inhale, as he said. He would have been going to jail for 7 years, as these folks were, never to be an attorney, much less the President of the United States. When we'd get maybe 100 of these people, we'd have this raid. 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd swoop in with maybe 350 cops and kick down all their doors and drag them out in chains, and literally kick down their doors. Back then, the police were applying what we called street justice, because the police were very upset that these drug dealers we were arresting were getting out of our jails before we even had time to write up the reports. Of course, that was the way our laws were written in the United States, which was a very good thing. We had the right to bail, and they all got bailed out. But the police I was working with didn't like that very much, so they would apply this street justice, doing as much damage to the premises as they could, kicking in the doors instead of knocking on the doors with a body worn. When we'd go in and we'd find any drugs in the house, we would often, depending on who the police officers were, but it was a regular thing, they would often cause a lot of damage in that house. A lot of needless damage when they were searching. For instance, somehow people's clothes might get dumped out on the floor while they're doing the search. Excuse me. And somebody might just accidentally spill a bottle of ketchup or honey on them from the kitchen. Things got broken. And the feeling was that if this was done, these people would be much less likely to get involved in drugs afterwards because it was just too costly to them. We'd also arrest everybody in the house if we found any drugs in the house. By everybody, I mean most of these people were young people that we had the body warrants on. But we'd go out and we'd arrest the mother, the father, the wife, whoever else was in the house, or threatened to. And we did that so that we could, what we call, flip these people, get them to work for us and give up their friends and their relatives. And the most vile, unethical of them, who would be willing to do that, we'd cut them a break and they wouldn't have to go to jail. But the people that felt like, I got into this on my own and I'm going to have to take my medicine, serve my time, whatever, the ethical ones, they got long prison sentences. So we had this way of calling out the good people and sending them to jail, and the less ethical people, we sent them right back to the street to continue what they were doing. We used to joke about it, and we'd say we were sure that if we caught the devil himself, we'd let him go if he gave up 3 of his demons. You see, it didn't have anything to do with solving a drug problem. It had to do with a numbers game. And this numbers game was so important because to our administrators, because those 76 troopers that we hired to replace us on the road, they only got paid by the federal government for that first year, unless our administrative staff could show that this war was so necessary that we could keep the money flowing from the federal government. So in those first years, we lied about everything, literally everything. This story that I just told you, these certainly were not drug dealers. But you know, when we'd get them down to the station, we would have already called the reporters to come out, take their pictures on what we call the perp walk, put them in their local papers and destroy whatever credibility, respectability these people had in their neighborhoods. And when we got them all lined up down at the back of the room, my boss would come out. He'd point to them and say to the reporters, you see that? You see that? There's 100 major drug dealers we took out of your community. And the media always went for it. They always bit. They'd never say, well, how much drugs were these people selling, or who were they selling to? All they wanted to know was what kind of drugs were they selling. If I had 100 people, I'd probably have 80 of them at least that I only sold me a joint or something. And out of the other 20, there'd be a sprinkling of, a couple might have sold a single dose of heroin or cocaine, or methamphetamine was getting big back then, 1970. Or some quaaludes, various things. But when they asked that question, we'd say, what were they selling? They were selling heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine and PCP and marijuana. And the reporters would go away thinking that these people were each running their own drugstore. You know? And they would write it up, and it would frighten the public. And the police could say, you see, we need more money. We need more police officers to fight this terrible war. Look how bad it is. And that wasn't the only way we lied. And when I say we, this isn't necessarily me, because this stuff used to disgust me quite a bit. But it's the big picture we. Back in, as I was showing these slides the other day, I was explaining how at the beginning of the war, heroin was coming in at 1.5% pure. There was almost no heroin in the United States at that time. And by 30 years later, it was coming in 38% pure, which is a problem.